The sky was dark and quiet, but suddenly a bright light broke the silence as a small escape pod fell from the clouds, leaving behind a trail of smoke and fire. The pod hit the ground with a loud crash deep inside a strange alien jungle full of glowing trees and strange sounds. The animals ran away and the wind became still as if the world was holding its breath inside the broken pod. A man slowly opened his eyes. His name was Ethan. He was a human, a young engineer from a space colony, lost and alone. He looked around and saw the forest full of strange plants and glowing lights. His leg was hurt, his suit was damaged, and he had nothing but a small backpack and a tool he always kept with him. He did not scream, he did not panic, he just breathed slowly and dragged himself out of the wreckage. He looked at the stars above, but there was no signal, no help, no way to call anyone. He was truly alone on an unknown planet with no idea where he was. As he walked through the jungle, he noticed that the plants moved slightly as if they were alive, watching him, following him. The air was thick and warm and the sky was purple and orange, with two small moons hanging above like eyes in the sky. After some time he heard a small noise. It was soft, weak like a cry. He followed the sound and found a small creature lying on the ground. It was hurt and shaking. It looked like a mix between a fox and a lizard, with bright blue eyes and soft glowing skin. It was no bigger than a kitten and it was bleeding from one leg. Ethan looked at it and for a moment he thought about walking away. He was already in danger, already in pain, but something in its eyes made him stop. He picked up the creature and wrapped it in a piece of cloth from his suit. He carried it back to the broken pod and placed it near a small fire he had made with dry branches. He gave it water. He cleaned the wound. He spoke softly to it, not knowing if it understood, but hoping that kindness was a language of its own. The creature looked at him with wide eyes and slowly stopped shaking. It blinked once, then twice, then slept quietly in his arms that night. Ethan sat near the fire holding the tiny thing close. He looked around the forest and felt the eyes on him again. Something was watching, something was close, but it did not attack. It only waited in the shadows like a hunter waiting for the right time. Wind carried strange whispers and the trees swayed gently even when the air was still above them. A group of tall figures stood hidden behind the leaves. Their skin was dark green and their eyes glowed yellow. They wore clothes made of bones and leaves and they held spears made of crystal. They were part of a tribe that lived deep inside the jungle, and they had seen what fell from the sky. They watched Ethan and the creature carefully, silently. They did not speak. They only observed because they had never seen a human before and they had never seen someone care for one of the small ones. The tiny glowing creatures were rare, sacred and wild. Most died before growing, most were feared, not loved. Ethan did not know he was being watched. He was too busy building a small shelter with sticks and metal pieces from the pod. He tried to make it roof to keep out the rain and walls to keep away the cold. The creature stayed close to him all the time, never letting him out of sight. And when Ethan slept, the creature slept beside him, breathing softly like a child in a cradle. On the third night, Ethan gave the creature a name. He called it Nexo because the name felt right and the creature seemed to like it. It made a small sound in reply, a happy sound, and for the first time since the crash Ethan smiled. But as he smiled, a low growl came from the dark trees behind the shelter. It was not Nexo, it was not the wind. It was something bigger, stronger, something with claws that scratched the ground and teeth that shined in the firelight. Ethan stood up slowly, holding a sharp piece of metal in one hand. He looked into the trees but saw nothing, just shadows, just silence. Nexo stood beside him, eyes glowing brighter, fur raised. It was ready to fight, but it was still so small, so young. The growl came again, closer this time, then silence again. Then nothing. Ethan did not sleep that night and neither did Nexo. They stayed close to each other, watching the trees, waiting for something to come, but nothing did. Above them, the moons moved slowly and the stars watched from far away, and in the forest, the hidden eyes of the tribe stayed open, learning, watching, deciding, because the human who fell from the sky had just changed everything and none of them knew what would happen next. The morning came slow and silent. The sun rose behind purple clouds and the jungle woke up with soft sounds of life. Birds with glass wings flew over trees that opened like flowers and the wind carried the smell of wet earth and smoke. Ethan sat by the fire with his hand on Nexo's back, feeling the slow breath of the little creature as it rested against his side. Its wound was healing but its eyes were sharp, awake, always watching, always learning. Ethan stood up and stretched his arms, the pain in his legs still there but his body had grown used to it. He walked around the crash site collecting more metal and wire and small pieces from the pod, trying to build something useful, anything that could help them survive. He made a new trap using broken springs and tied vines, and even though it looked, which is strange, it worked that day. He caught a small creature like a rabbit with no eyes and teeth, too many for its face. He cooked it slowly and shared it with Nexo, who sniffed it first, then ate it fast, then licked Ethan's hand without fear. Days passed, and Nexo grew fast. In fact, its legs became longer, its back straighter, and its tail stronger. It could now climb trees in seconds and jump from one branch to another like a shadow in motion. It followed Ethan wherever he went, and sometimes even helped him spot danger before it came close. It was not just a pet now, it was something more, something wild and loyal, something born for this jungle but changed by the human who saved it. Ethan began to talk to it more, even though he knew it did not understand the words he told. It's stories about the stars, about Earth, about his ship, and the people he left behind. He laughed when Nexo tilted its head as if confused, and smiled when it tried to mimic his sounds with little chirps and clicks. But far away in the deep green shadows, the tribe was watching again. They had seen the bond grow. They had seen the small beast become something powerful, something strange. They were afraid because the stories passed by their elders said these creatures were never to be touched, never to be raised. They were meant to be wild, meant to be left alone, because if they lived, they became predators, kings of the jungle, beasts that feared nothing and destroyed. Now the tribe leader, an old warrior with one eye and silver marks on his skin, spoke to the others in firelight. He said the human was a curse, a danger, a threat to the balance of the forest. He said the creature would grow into a monster and kill them all. He ordered the scouts to prepare spears and nets to bring back the human alive or dead, but the creature must be destroyed before it became unstoppable. That night Ethan sat on a high rock watching the sky. Nexo beside him, calm and silent. The stars were brighter here and the moons were full and glowing. They looked like old eyes, full of secrets and watching everything below. Suddenly Nexo stood still, ears, sharp nose moving. It looked toward the trees and gave a low growl. Ethan followed its gaze and saw nothing at first, but then movement, fast and silent figures in the dark, tall shadows with weapons moving closer. Ethan grabbed his metal spear and stepped in front of Nexo, ready to defend. 3 tribal hunters jumped from the trees with ropes and crystal blades. They moved fast and with skill, but Nexo moved faster. It leaped into the air and knocked one to the ground with a scream. It clawed another's leg and growled so loud the birds fled from nearby trees. Ethan fought the third, swinging his spear, blocking the blade, then pushing him back with fire from a small tool he had saved from the ship. The fight was quick but hard. The hunters ran away bleeding. The third was left unconscious on the ground. Nexo circled him once, then looked at Ethan as if asking what to do. Ethan knelt and tied the hunter's hands with vines, then dragged him near the fire and waited. Later that night, as the hunter woke up, Ethan gave him water and food. The man did not speak but watched him carefully, then looked at Nexo and then at the stars, as if thinking about something older than all of them. The hunter pointed at the creature, then at Ethan, then at the forest, then made a sign with his hands like fire and wings. Hen did not understand, but he felt something change. A message passed without words, a warning maybe, or maybe something else. The hunter stayed silent, but his eyes showed fear and respect both at once. Before dawn he ran back into the jungle, leaving behind a single carved stone with a symbol of a spiral and a claw. Ethan held it in his hand and looked at Nexo, who now stood tall, alert and ready, and in that moment he knew they were not just surviving anymore. They were becoming something new, something the tribe had never seen before, something the jungle could not control. The jungle was no longer quiet. It spoke in whispers, now soft and nervous, as if the trees themselves were warning each other that something had changed. The human had not only survived, he had created something new, something strange, something that did not belong to the old story. As Nexo was no longer small, its legs were strong, its back wide, its claws sharp like blades of crystal, and its teeth glowed slightly in the dark. With each breath it made the ground feel alive, like a drumbeat from under the soil. It moved like a shadow, faster than any animal, faster than any hunter, and Ethan had seen it take down a flying beast twice. Its size without a sound, and still returned to him with soft eyes and a low hum like a child asking for praise. He had stopped counting the days. His hair was longer, now his skin darker from the sun and dirt, but his eyes were clearer than ever. He trained with Nexo every day, taught it signs and sounds and simple moves with his hands. Nexo learned quickly. It understood danger, it understood commands, it even understood silence, and sometimes Ethan wondered if it could read his thoughts. The tribe watched from a distance. They saw the human build tools from stone and metal. They saw the creature grow into something powerful, something deadly, and they feared it more with each day. The old leader sent new scouts to follow them, but only one returned, his arm broken, his leg burned, and his eyes wide with terror. He said the creature moved like fire and darkness. He said it hunted with the mind of a man and the soul of a beast. He said it let him live on purpose. The princess heard his story from the edge of the fire. She said nothing, but her heart was loud. Inside her chest she had watched the human before from high in the trees, hidden in the vines. Her name was Kari, and she was the daughter of the tribe's leader, but she was not like him. Her thoughts were different, softer, deeper. She had seen the crash. She had seen the human carry the baby creature. She had seen him bleed and suffer and still protect it like family, like blood. One night she returned alone. She climbed through the jungle until she saw them again. Ethan by the fire, Nexo sleeping beside him, breathing slow and deep like a beast at peace. She watched for hours, silent, unseen, like a shadow in the leaves, and then Ethan looked up and his eyes met hers. He did not move. He did not call out. He only looked calm and tired and full of questions. Kari did not speak. She only vanished back into the trees like smoke, but that moment stayed in her like a seed in the soil. Next day, Ethan and Nexo walked deep into the northern side of the jungle, a place full of bones and broken trees, a place even the animals feared. Nexo led the way, its ears sharp, its body low and ready. Ethan followed with a new spear made from ship metal and stone, stronger than anything he had used before. A beast lived there, a real one, huge and ancient, with skin like rock and eyes like ice. The tribe had called it the Bone Eater, and it ruled that part of the forest alone. But Nexo was not afraid. It moved into the clearing where bones covered the ground, and it stood still like a statue, waiting for the sound of breath. Then the beast appeared. Its body long and wide, with legs like tree trunks and a mouth full of curved teeth. It roared and the trees shook, birds flew away, and Ethan stood frozen for 1 second. Then Nexo leaped forward and the fight began. It was fast and wild. Nexo clawed. Its eyes bit. Its neck jumped over its back and dodged each crushing step. The beast roared and swung its tail, but Nexo was faster, smarter. It had learned not just to fight, but to hunt, to think, to win. Ethan shouted commands, short and clear, and Nexo followed each one without fear, without mistake. After a long battle, the Bone Eater fell to the ground, blood and dust rising into the air like smoke from an old fire. Nexo stood on its body, chest heaving but eyes calm. It turned to Ethan and made a sound deep and sharp like a call from another world. They left the body there untouched, a message to the jungle, to the tribe, to anyone watching, that the human and his creature were not prey. They were not lost, they were not weaker. Stood far away, her hands shaking, not from fear but from wonder. She had seen something impossible. A bond that no story had ever told, a creature that could kill but chose not to, a human who taught with kindness, not chains. She returned to her father and said nothing, but the elders saw her eyes and knew her thoughts were no longer his, and that fear began to grow in the heart of the tribe. Not just fear of the beast, but fear of the change coming from the sky and the fire and the bond that should never have been, because now the creature had learned to kill, and it had also learned to love. The jungle burned with whispers that night. Every leaf, every branch, every shadow seemed to carry the same message. The human had crossed a line, the creature had become a weapon, and now the tribe would act, not with words, not with warnings, but with fire and blood. Ethan did not know they were coming. He was busy sharpening his spear beside the sleeping form of Nexo, who now rested like a beast, full and calm. After their last hunt, the stars above blinked like cold eyes, and the moons hung low as if waiting for what would come. Next, Kari sat in the tribal hall, her face hidden behind the veil of her title, her voice quiet as her father stood in front of the warriors. His hand raised, his words sharp. He spoke of old rules, of sacred beasts, of broken laws. He called the human a threat, a curse from the sky, and the creature a sin made of tooth and flame. The tribe listened, the warriors cheered, and the drums began to beat one by one, echoing through the trees like the sound of war waking from sleep. Kari said nothing, but her fists were tight under her robe, her heart louder than the drums, her thoughts filled with the eyes of the man who had not begged, not threatened, not harmed. The land of warriors moved like shadows through the trees, their steps silent, their faces painted in ash and bone. They reached the camp before sunrise, the fire still low, the world still dreaming, and then they attacked. With ropes, with blades, with smoke and loud cries. Ethan woke to the sound of fire and Nexo's roar. He jumped up, but it was too late. A net wrapped around him, pulling him down, and he saw Nexo surrounded by flames and spears, fighting, biting, burning, but not able to reach him, not able to break free. A sharp blow to the head, and the world turned black when he opened his eyes again. The sun was high and hot, the trees were gone, the jungle far. He was tied in the center of a wide circle made of stone, and fire. Tribal faces stared at him from all sides, their eyes cold, their mouths silent. Above him stood the chief, tall, strong, with skin painted red, holding a staff of bone and crystal. He called out to the tribe. He raised his hand and named Ethan, the bringer of chaos, the one who raised the cursed beast and broke the peace of the forest. He said the punishment was death, not by sword but by trial, the blood trial, an old law older than the tribe itself. Ethan tried to speak, but no one listened. His words were swallowed by the chanting of the crowd, by the beat of the drums, by the sound of anger older than reason. He looked around and saw Kari standing behind her father, her eyes locked on his, and he saw pain there, not fear, not hate, just pain. He was pushed into the arena, a wide ring of stone with nothing but sand and bone. The gate closed behind him, and from the other side they opened another, and out came a beast unlike any he had seen, tall like a tree, with 6 legs and eyes like mirrors, its mouth wide, its breath like smoke. It was hungry, it was angry, and it was fast. Ethan picked up a broken spear from the ground, his hands shaking but his feet steady. He watched the beast move and waited for the right moment, for the small chance for the opening. It charged, and he dodged barely. The ground cracked where it landed. He stabbed once, twice, missed both times. The crowd roared, not in anger, but in hunger, in hope for blood. The beast attacked again and again, and Ethan fell. Once, twice, the spear broke and the sand red, his body weakened. Then came the roar, not from the beast, not from the crowd, but from above, from the sky, from Nexo. It broke through the trees like a storm, its body bigger than before, covered in ash and scars, its eyes wild and glowing and full of fire. It crashed into the arena like a meteor, clawing, biting, screaming, tearing through the walls, through the guards, through the chains. The beast turned to face it, and for a moment the world stopped. 2 monsters, one born of nature, one raised by man, facing each other in a circle of stone. Then they moved. The fight was fast, brutal, beautiful. Nexo fought with fury, with skill, with purpose, every move taught by Ethan, every roar a promise, every strike a memory of the jungle and the nights and the bond that had never been broken. The enemy fell, torn, crushed, ended, and Nexo stood tall, roaring to the sky, not in victory but in warning. The tribe was silent. He then lay on the ground, breathing, hurt but alive, and Nexo moved to his side, licking his hand like the first night under the stars. Kari stepped into the arena, her voice calm, her hands raised. She walked past the warriors, past her father, and stood before Ethan and Nexo, and then she turned to the tribe and said, "He lives because he is not our enemy." And no one spoke because they had seen what words could not tell. A man, a beast, a bond, a trial of blood, and a truth that could not be killed. The arena was quiet. The fire had died, the crowd had scattered, but Kari remained standing in the middle with Ethan beside her, still weak and bleeding, and Nexo close like a living wall of muscle and breath. The tribe watched from the edge, confused and afraid, their hands still holding weapons but their hearts holding questions. Ethan did not understand her words, but he saw her eyes, and he knew something had changed, not just in her but in the people, and the silence, and the very air they breathed. Turned and walked away without looking back, and the warriors parted to let her pass. The chief, her father, stood still, his face frozen like stone, his pride cracked, his law broken by the beast, by the bond, by his own daughter. That night Ethan was taken to a small hut, not a prison but not freedom either. Kari came with herbs and water and helped him sit, helped him breathe, helped him live. Her hands gentle, her voice low and careful, like she was speaking to a fire that could burn or warm. She pointed to herself and said her name slowly, Kari, then pointed to him and waited, to him and waited. Ethan coughed, smiled, and said his name. Ethan, she repeated it like a song, and then pointed to Nexo, who was sleeping just outside the hut, curled like a silent guardian. Ethan whispered the name, and Kari nodded as if she already knew. For the next few days the tribe stayed quiet. No more attacks, no more trials, only watching from the trees and from the shadows. Some with fear, some with hate, but some with wonder, because they'd seen the beast protect, not destroy. They'd seen the human bleed for the forest, not burn it. Kari came each day, sometimes with food, sometimes with questions. Always with calm, always with care. She taught him a few words of her language, and he taught her signs he used with Nexo, simple things: danger, safe, wait, friend. They learned slowly, but they understood more than the words. One morning Kari brought Ethan to the edge of the village, where the river met the stone. She pointed to the water and then to the sky, and then drew a shape in the dirt, a creature like Nexo but bigger, with wings and fire in its eyes. She told a story using her hands and voice, and Ethan listened. Long ago her people found the glowing beasts deep in the mountains, small and strange but full of power. They took them, trained them, used them as weapons, until one day they turned wild and destroyed everything. Only a few survived, and her people swore never to touch them again, never to raise them again, never to break the balance. But now Ethan had done it. He had raised one, and not with pain, not with fear, but with care and trust, and the old fear had returned to the tribe, because the stories said if one of these beasts ever lived again, it would bring war or peace. Or both. Kari looked at Ethan and asked one word: enemy or savior, and Ethan had no answer, only silence, only memory, only the truth in his hands and in Nexo's eyes. Later that night a fire burned in the center of the village, and the chief called the council, his voice tired, his face older than before. He said the tribe must decide not just about the man and the beast, but about Kari, who had stood against him, who had broken the old law. Some shouted that she had betrayed her blood, others said she had shown courage. Ethan stood nearby, hearing the tone, not the words, watching the fire and knowing it was not about him anymore. It was about change, about fear, about something old dying and something new trying to live. Growled low and stepped forward, but Ethan held him back gently with one word: wait. Kari stood tall and strong and spoke with clear voice. She said the forest was changing, the stars were changing, and the tribe must change too. She said the beast was not a monster and the man was not a curse. She said she believed in something more, in a future not written by fear. At the council was silent, but the chief stood and walked toward Ethan, his eyes full of storms. He looked at the man who had survived, who had fought, who had protected, and he looked at Nexo, who now stood calm but ready, and then he looked at his daughter, who had become a leader without permission. He said the forest would decide, the stars would decide, not him, not now. He turned and left, and the fire cracked behind him. Kari turned to Ethan and smiled, but her eyes were heavy with worry, because she knew this was not the end, only the edge of something bigger, something coming from the jungle, from the sky, from the hearts of those who had seen too much to go back. And Ethan knew to that he was no longer just a man lost in the woods. He was something else. Now not a hero, not a threat, but a symbol, and symbols are never left alone for long. The jungle had changed, but it had not healed. The roots still whispered of blood, the leaves still held fear, and the wind no longer felt clean. It moved like a warning, like something cold brushing against the skin before the storm. And deep inside the tribe lines were being drawn, not with fire, not with words, but with silence, with glances, with footsteps that avoided old paths. Kari walked through the village every morning with her head high, her voice calm, but she could feel the shift, the way warriors looked away, the way the elders stopped speaking when she entered the circle, the way even the trees seemed to listen, as if they too were waiting for someone to make the first move. Ethan stayed near the edge of the jungle with Nexo, always watching, always building small tools, small traps, not for war but for warning. His body still healing, his mind sharper than before. He felt the weight of the tribe, his fear pressing on his back like the sky was falling one cloud at a time. Menexo had changed again, its body stronger, its eyes brighter, its mind more focused. It understood more than before. It responded. Not just to words or signs, but to emotion, to energy, to danger. It had become more than just a creature. It had become aware. One night, Ethan sat beside the fire and whispered to Nexo stories of Earth, of oceans and steel cities and stars that never blinked, and Nexo listened, eyes glowing softly, tail curled around Ethan like a promise of protection. But the shadows were moving in other places. The chief no longer lead with strength, but with anger, his words heavy, his steps unsure. He met with the old warriors in secret, and they spoke of tradition, of control, of fear, and one word kept rising like smoke from their mouths: purge. They wanted to end the threat before it became something they could no longer hold. They wanted to take Kari and strip her title. They wanted to kill the human and burn the beast and erase the story before it became truth. But not all agreed. Some of the younger ones had seen the fight. In the arena they had seen Nexo defend, not attack. They had seen Ethan stand, not run, and Kari speak, not break, and those images lived inside them like sparks, like seeds waiting for the right wind. So a quiet war began, not with blades, not yet, but with secrets, with missing supplies, with strange fires at night, with guards disappearing from their posts and no one speaking of it. In the morning, Kari noticed first. She felt the cold and the glances, the weight in the air, and she knew something was coming. She went to Ethan and told him with hands and eyes and broken words that there was danger, that not all shadows were beasts. That night they left the hut and moved deeper into the jungle, into a hidden cave where the stone walls were warm and the air dry, and the stars above could still be seen through a hole in the ceiling like a forgotten window to the sky. Kari brought others to 3 warriors who trusted her, to healers who remembered mercy, and a boy with no name who followed Nexo like a brother. They made a small camp, quiet, careful, full of questions and quiet hope. Ethan taught them how to make fire that never smoked, traps that sang when touched, and signs to use when voices were too loud. And Nexo watched over them every night, never sleeping fully, always alert, always waiting back. In the village, the chief stood before the fire and raised his voice. He spoke of law, of purity, of war. He named Kari a traitor and called for her capture. He said the human had poisoned her mind and the beast had cursed her blood, and he sent his strongest to find them. But the jungle had learned to it, had seen fire and chosen silence. The warriors moved, but the roots shifted, the wind turned and the birds cried out, and each time they came close, something stopped them. A vine, a snake, a call that was not human. The tribe was splitting, not cleanly, but like wood under pressure, slowly cracking from the inside, and Kari felt the time running out like water through her fingers. She stood before her small group and told them with hands and firelight that this was no longer about the beast or the man. This was about what kind of tribe they would become. Would they choose fear or change, chains or wings? Ethan looked at her and nodded. He did not need to understand every word. The meaning was in her face, in her voice, in the way even Nexo leaned forward as if listening. That night, Ethan and Kari stood on a high rock, looking down at the village, at the fires below it, the drums starting to beat, and they knew the final path was near, not just for them, but for everyone who walked this land, because there could be no more shadows, no more waiting. There would be light, or there would be fire. And Nexo growled low and deep like thunder waiting just beyond the horizon. The jungle did not sleep that night. The wind moved like a whisper, carrying the breath of fire and fear. The trees stood still as if watching the ground, and the stars above blinked slow like they knew what was coming. Kari stood alone at the edge of the old path, her eyes fixed on the village lights below, her hands cold, her heart full of storms behind her. Ethan waited with Nexo at his side, and the others watching, quiet, ready, unsure, because they all knew this was not just a fight, it was a decision, a final step that could not be undone. The chief had called the full council. Every torch was lit, every drum was quiet. The whole tribe gathered in the circle of stone where the first laws were carved into the earth. He stood at the center, with his voice heavy, his face marked with paint that spoke of war and judgment. He raised his hand and called her name, and his voice was not that of a father but of a ruler. Kari stepped out of the shadows, walked into the circle with slow steps, her cloak trailing in the dust, her eyes locked on her father's, but her fear buried deep inside. She did not look back, because she knew if she did she would stop, and she could not stop, not now. The chief spoke of betrayal, of broken laws, of sacred things lost. He pointed to her and said she must kneel and give up her name and her blood, and if she refused, then the tribe would choose a new heir, one from the warriors, one loyal to tradition, and if she stood against him she would face the old law, the blood duel, the fire oath, the final choice. She did not speak at first, only looked at the faces around her, the ones who had taught her how to hunt, how to climb, how to sing the forest songs, and she saw fear in many, but she also saw something else, something small, something rising like light behind a cloud. Ethan stepped forward with Nexo at his side, and the circle moved back, afraid, unsure, but watching. He did not raise a weapon, he did not raise his voice, he simply stood behind her, silent, like a wall, like a promise. The chief raised his spear and called the final challenge. He said she had no choice but to fight or fall, and Kari stepped forward and answered without shaking, without turning away. She said one word, loud and clear, and That word was stand. The duel began fast, sharp like thunder hitting stone. The chief moved with strength, with fury, with skill, his blade cutting the air, his feet silent on the ground. But Kari moved like wind, like water, like memory, her blade smaller, but her eyes brighter, her steps lighter, and the fight was not between two bodies, but two beliefs, two futures. Ethan watched with breath held, and Nexo stood still but tense, ready not to join but to protect if needed, because it understood this was Kari's moment, not his, not theirs, but hers. The battle lasted only minutes but felt like hours. Dust rose, blood spilled, but not enough to stop, and then Kari turned, stepped close, and disarmed her father, not with power but with speed and trust. And when she held her blade to his chest, she did not strike. She stepped back and dropped her weapon and raised her hand and said she would not lead by killing. She would not win by blood. She would lead only if the tribe stood with her, not by fear, but by choice. Silence fell like snow, no wind, no sound, just the fire cracking in the center and the eyes of every man, woman, and child locked on her. Then the old healer stepped forward first, then a young hunter, then the mother with the scarred hands, and slowly the circle filled with people standing behind her, not all, not most, but enough, and that was all she needed. The chief stepped back, dropped his spear, and walked away, not as a leader but as a man who had lost, and Kari turned to Ethan and nodded, and Nexo gave a soft sound, like a breath, like peace. In the days that followed, the tribe changed, not fast, not fully, but enough. Walls were taken down, old rules rewritten, the cave became a center of learning. Nexo stayed close to the village, but free, always free, and the people learned to watch with new eyes, not just fear but respect. Ethan chose to stay. Not because he had no ship, not because he had nowhere else, but because he had found something not in the stars but in the soil and the people, in the bond that had started with a broken cry in the jungle. And one night he stood beside Kari on the high cliff with Nexo behind them and the stars wide above, and he asked what now, and she smiled and said something in her language, and even without words he understood, because she had no choice but to stand, and now they would rise together.